All right. Well, we're waiting for folks to show up, and I want to welcome those who are here already. Midas, welcome. Officer Carol Williams, thank you for being here this evening. Lieutenant San Miguel, as always, thank you. And Sergeant Maloney, thank you for being here. We are waiting for 3 additional members of the Hiring and Training Subcommittee before we reach quorum.
Can I check the maths on that? Because Alai is not attending. She's not present. And so I think we would only need 3 members.
Well,
was Daniel Borson one of ours?
No, it's Midas, Justin, Dee, Leah, Jason, Alai, and Sandra.
Okay. I was kind of hoping maybe we could grab Daniel. He's in the attendees.
Yeah.
But we can't because he wasn't selected by the main body.
So Kaz, I show 6 people. So Dee, Leah, Jason, Justin, Sandra, Midas.
Okay, Alai must have been replaced. Sorry, my recollection's inaccurate, which is unfortunate.
Well, let me check my notes here.
Well, we have Midas.
We originally had 7, and Alai resigned, leaving us with 6.
So
you have a puzzle.
I think, yeah. Sorry, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah. So that would mean that we need 3. Half. Oh, it's half plus 1. My apologies.
Half plus 1.
Yeah.
So be 4.
Well, let's hope we get another 3.
Yeah. There is Justin. Welcome, Justin.
I'm sorry for my tardiness. It's kind of been a long day.
Glad to have you here. We're waiting for 2 additional members of the subcommittee before we reach quorum. A long day after an evening meeting last night, right?
You're muted there, Justin.
Oh, yeah, my life's kind of full.
Excellent.
Right
We
now.
have 4.
We do have 4.
All right, good deal.
Well, I will breathe a sigh of relief, and I think we're now ready to start.
Excellent.
So we are recording. Very well. Good evening, everyone. It's a little bit after 6 p.m., Wednesday, the 3rd of February. Welcome to the first meeting of the Ad Hoc Committee on Police Policy Subcommittee on Hiring and Training. We're meeting virtually over Zoom in order to comply with Governor Kate Brown's Stay Home, Save Lives executive order. And first thing I'm going to do in this meeting is to run through very briefly a proposed order of business so that we're all on the same page with regards to how we intend to proceed. So in just a moment, I will share my screen. And let me know if you can see that. Oh, community oversight. My apologies. I'm going to stop that share. Got the wrong one. Jeremy, are there any administrative items you can talk about while I find the right presentation?
I can help you out, Kaz.
Okay.
So,
or if you're able to share it.
Well, no. Well, I could, but I could help you out by having just a few announcements here. If that would be helpful, I'm happy to do that. And I'll take that as a yes.
Turns out I just forgot to change the change the first slide. My apologies there.
Excellent.
I hope everyone appreciates the slickness of my facilitation. But it is 2 in the morning where I am. So first of all, just a quick once over the group agreement. We're all aware of this. Maintain awareness of power differentials. Community members get priority if there are councillors present. Share time and contribute proportionally. Contribute your own experience. Default to confidentiality. Listen actively and fully. Avoid generalization and assumption. Remember, intent and impact matter. Value dissenting opinions. Maintain the goal of dialogue, not debate. Be curious. Practice accountability. And limit use of the chat box to procedural and informational items only. As well as that, we're going to ask you to limit yourselves to 3 minutes every time you speak, but the clock resets once you're done. And you may speak again once anyone else in the queue has spoken. So in terms of the facilitation plan, oh, this is the wrong presentation. I am so sorry. I have saved the wrong one. So I'll just let you guys know off the top of my head, essentially the position that we have, we've adopted with these subcommittees is that we use the first subcommittee to discuss broad themes. And some of those have been put forward in the document that was shared with you all a couple of weeks ago. This time I will be able to share my screen and I will be able to do so, I hope, correctly. So this is the hiring and training elements of Campaign Zero and 21st Century Policing. A lot of these are items that EPD has already enacted, at least in part. So we can go through those. In addition, we've had a number of things that have been brought up by committee members that you all may wish to discuss. For example, some members have expressed concerns about white nationalist and other anti-democratic sentiments that may be held by officers or potential recruits. So that's one area where there may be an element of discussion. A couple of other members have also raised in the full committee meeting fears or concerns rather around how training contractors are vetted and chosen, and the extent to which the quality of the training reflects the standards of the community. So these are 2 areas that I'm aware of, and I'm going to invite members to raise their hands and let me know if they have any other issues they would like to go over in detail tonight. I see Justin. Go ahead.
Yeah, just the issue of hiring in regards to diversity. What's being done to make sure that that is a priority when it comes to hiring, and making sure that we're pulling from a diverse applicant pool instead of oftentimes majority culture.
Okay, I'll add that to the list. And I see Leah as well.
Yes, this is more just are we going to be able to take some time to do some introductions and that? I can only see a few people. Can we do that to make sure we know who's here?
Oh yes, absolutely. I do apologize. I got a little bit flustered when the wrong
2 o'clock in the morning. Excuse.
So I'm going to invite the members of EPD, the subject matter experts, to introduce themselves. And then we'll have the committee members. I think you know me and Kevin all too well by now, so I will refrain. So Sergeant San Miguel, I see that you're unmuted if you want to go first.
Yeah, I'm Angie San Miguel. I'm a lieutenant with the police department, and I've been with the department for 30 years now, and I am currently the lieutenant in charge of the training division.
So I'll go ahead and go now. So I'm Sergeant Ryan Maloney with the Eugene Police Department. I've been here for about 16 years. I'm currently assigned to take lead on our hiring as far as the sergeant level stuff. And I'm filling in for Lieutenant Tinseth tonight to see if I can help answer some questions here. And based on the fact that Lieutenant Tinseth is ill, so he's unable to make it today. And I also take part in the instruction with training. And some of you I recognize just from the ad hoc committees and the use of force stuff that I've had talks with.
And Officer Williams.
I'm Officer Carol Williams. Unfortunately, my video is not working today, and I have been unable to troubleshoot this. I am a sworn police officer with EPD, and I have been employed as such for 19 years. I recently, January of last year, was given the opportunity to fill a brand new role with the Eugene Police Department as the background and recruitment officer. This is a new role for our department and for me, which I was very, very excited to take part in. And I'm hoping that I can answer any of the questions that you guys have about our recruitment efforts and any of the questions regarding background investigations. Thank
you very much. And in that intervening period, I've managed to find the presentation. It was, of course, saved under the wrong name. We're getting through a lot of those, but I don't think I need to share it at this point. It may be that we want later on to write some things up. So in terms of agenda items, we've had white nationalism as and other anti-democratic ideologies raised as a general issue. We've had training contractors suggested and diversity in hiring. So I will very much let the committee lead. I think, Justin, given that you're a subcommittee member, I'd invite you to talk about some of your interests and concerns about hiring.
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, I guess I'll introduce myself so you guys know who I am. My name is Justin Myers. I'm actually a director for Youth for Christ, which is a nonprofit here in town in Springfield. But I also sit on a stewardship committee for ADOS here in the state of Oregon. So in regards to hiring, there's a couple things. The first thing is what exactly efforts are being done to make sure that the EPD itself and the staff are reflecting the community in which they're serving. So in reference to that, and then what is there any targeted efforts to try and bring in a diverse applicant pool? And then has there been any thought given to the background process and how that may deter people of color or people on lower socioeconomic backgrounds, and specifically things like credit checks and things like that. Those are kind of some of the broad issues that I am concerned
about. Okay, Lieutenant San Miguel, I suspect you're probably best equipped to talk on this issue.
Can I just bring up a point of process?
Oh, sure.
I'm just wondering if it might be a little bit smoother if we could kind of do introductions and kind of make a list of the specific things that people want to get to instead of kind of popcorning around.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. I'll be led by the committee. In other committee meetings, we've kind of let the discussion flow more freely, but if you'd like to be more focused.
I think
what does the group think?
Yeah, I think for efficiency's sake, I think that would be wise if we can address one topic after another, so we're not bouncing all around. It might be easier for those answering questions as well.
Okay, so Justin, sorry, you had a bunch of questions around hiring and training. So Leah, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I have some sort of some specific questions. I guess I would like to know a little bit about how trainers and training are chosen and what the focus is, and who has input into that process. I'd like to know a little bit about, I think Kara said that she does the background in recruitment, but I'd like to know specifically about what is being done to kind of look at background, not just for new hires, but for current officers, and looking for that white nationalism or other troubling things. I guess also to talk about when we're talking about training, I'd like to know how trainings happen, how are people evaluated or held accountable to those standards that they're taught, yeah, and who, how, well, I guess first of all I should ask, is there sort of a yearly agenda, or is there a training calendar, and what things have we heard a little bit about some things that have to be covered, and what does the force feel like can be added to that and needs to be added, if that makes sense. I'm not sure it did, but.
I think that makes perfect sense. Midas, would you like to go next?
Yeah, so is this an introduction, or am I just more so talking about
a little introduction if you wish, and then you can dive into the questions that you have.
I didn't do that.
For sure. I'm Midas. I mean, y'all know how I feel about the police force, but while we're here, things I'm a little more focused on. Something I'm wanting to know about is how often the trainers and the FTOs switched out. And how often are they evaluated independently? And switched out specifically just trying to make sure that we don't have the same 5 officers training people for 15 years, giving no breadth of new knowledge or letting people get a break from that so they can actually get back on the streets and then learn what to train people on. And then the possibility of a civilian review on the trainers, some sort of independent review board, preferably civilians or council members. And then also, it seems we have a pretty long probationary period while the officer, they're in the 25%, 50%, 75. I'm wondering what the possibility of that officer announcing that they're under training, or there being some sort of way for the people that they interact with to know that this is an officer that is under training, kind of like we put a student driver sticker on student driver's cars. It'd be nice to know if the police officer we're dealing with isn't quite a police officer yet. I think most of my other questions got answered in the full city council meeting. Oh yeah, I just wanted to talk about the psych eval. It seems like the psych eval is very short. The behavioral health training is like 18 hours only, and the psych eval was like a 45-minute psych eval. And that just seems wrong. So that's those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. And then Jason, and then Leah, I will return to you so you can do your introduction as well. Jason, would you like to go ahead, introduce yourself, and let us know what's on your agenda for tonight?
Sure. Jason Mack. I use they, them pronouns, and I work for, professionally, I work for the state of Oregon as a diversity inclusion manager. But in my community role, I am representing the Asian Pacific Islander Community Action Team, APACAT, and I'm a part of a lot of different community organizations. I think that my main goal is to really understand sort of more strategically how diversity, equity, inclusion is really integrated into the core of what EPD does. Not just sort of discrete efforts, but I want to understand more strategically how does it align with the city's vision and larger strategy. I want to understand how it is integrated instead of standalone. So those are a lot of the things, and I want to understand better, particularly around the white nationalism piece, what that looks like, particularly, I would say on the side of social media, if a current officer should have social media that is less than becoming. We'll just put it that way.
Okay. So white nationalism, especially around social media. Leah, I'll hand over to you to do your community introduction, and then we can start moving through the questions.
I'm so sorry. I made a big fuss and then I didn't do it. My name is Leah Edelman. I actually work for Lane County Public Health, but I'm here at the request of Temple Beth Israel. I'm Jewish. I'm a lesbian. My wife is deaf. We're raising a child who is Black. So a lot of different things intersect to make us concerned about all of these things.
Okay, thank you very much. And I've just seen that Mayor Vinnis has come in as well. Mayor Vinnis, is there anything you'd like to add to discussion, or are you just happy to sit and listen for the time being?
No, I just came to sit and listen. So thank you all very much for doing this work.
Okay, thank you very much. So I managed to grab a couple of your questions, Justin, in terms of, is there a plan for diversity in hiring? But I'm afraid I'll need you to reiterate the others.
Yeah, so I guess, I mean, that's a good place to start. My other questions were in regards to hiring, specifically in reference to the background check. You know, there's a credit check that's involved in that, and making sure that we're not disqualifying individuals coming from a lower socioeconomic background, especially those people of color, oftentimes. And then, you know, I'm drawing a blank on the other ones. Yeah, so I guess those are two really good places to start.
Okay, so yeah, Lieutenant San Miguel, I think you're the appropriate person, but you know, hand off any questions to the others if it's more appropriate.
Yeah, so I'm actually gonna divert these questions to Sergeant Maloney and to Kara Williams. I haven't been actually in the Office of Hiring and Recruiting for almost 3 years because I'm in the training division now.
Right.
So they're really gonna have the most current info on that. So I'm gonna defer these questions to them.
So I'll go ahead and, I got a little feedback there for a second. I'll go ahead and address these questions as best I can. So just to illustrate my role in this process is I've been in this position for about a year. And so I'm still obviously getting my feet wet a little bit and running through this. Lieutenant Tinseth typically has, when it comes to overall strategic plans, meeting with the chief and community and the orientation as far as the goal and path we're on, he's got a lot of those details. So I'll try and fill in the gaps as much as I can. When it comes to diversity and looking for diversity in hiring, that's always the forefront on our mind when it comes to our hiring processes. And as far as our outreach and recruitment, we're constantly looking for different opportunities to engage with the community with booths and opportunities to contact and to get information out, whether it be via billboard, via website, mouth to mouth, you know, word face-to-face type things. We advertise in as many different diverse atmospheres as we can, not just centralizing in one group.
Can you give detail to that? Like what specifically? When you say diverse groups, like in what specific methods are you referring to?
Well, so for years, with COVID, things have changed a little bit, but for years and times, we'll always have a booth at like the Asian festivals. We'll go to the women in law enforcement and gender neutral community events where we can communicate with people, let them know that, you know, we're always hiring, we're looking for people, and we're trying to advance the career as a police officer to encompass everybody that's represented in the community, not just a small few. The National Minority Update reports, we advertise in there and we're in contact with them. Radio, as much as we can, depending on where, what we're reaching for. We'll talk to basically the radio stations, their demographics and where they're looking at, where they broadcast to and how many languages they broadcast in, and give them the information we need to have broadcasted out, or some examples of that. I believe we put together a list. I don't know if Jeremy got those to you, of specific locations and stuff that was supposed to be, I think, shown to you guys or given to you guys, so you at least had that to go on. Does that kind of answer your question a little bit? I'm trying to be as specific as I can. A lot of this information Tinseth has already set up. And so I didn't have access to his stuff. And this was kind of a last minute thing that I got asked to come and try and help out, answer these questions for.
Sure. No worries. I appreciate that.
Oh, no problem.
And then in reference specifically to the background check when doing investigations, can you kind of dive in, like, are there things that are being done to make sure that people in specific socioeconomic groups are not being disqualified because of things? We see, like, in reference specifically to the racial wealth gap, which is something that can affect credit, which is a big deterrent for a lot of employers, which can disqualify a lot of people of color because of those wealth gaps. And so is that something that's being taken into consideration when looking at that? Or has it been something that's been thought about?
Yeah, definitely. I can say 100% it's taken into consideration. And there's actually laws regarding that. Based on doing a credit check, you can't base a hiring and firing on somebody's socioeconomic status on their credit return. Our backgrounds are pretty extensive and they're very detail oriented. So that's merely a small portion of that. And what that lends to in the overall background investigations, it lends to credibility is people being honest, people working through. Everybody's got different things that they're working through, right? Everybody is, one step away from making a big mistake sometimes in their lives. All those things are taken into consideration for a totality of how we determine whether or not somebody passed a background or doesn't pass a background. We don't base somebody's credit history solely on a reason whether we hire them or don't hire them or don't pass them on background. It's there is, like I said, there's litigation defending that so that doesn't occur. And we take it pretty serious on our end, that it's just simply leaning toward honesty, being open and honest, and credibility to your trustworthiness as a person, that we even gather that information and then ask you about it. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, it does. Is there anything in regards to addressing implicit bias from those who are doing the background investigation to make sure they're not viewing anything else in light of specific things that come up? Again, socioeconomic status being one of those. And I hate to continue to push this, but I've had individuals, including myself, who received very negative responses from law enforcement simply because of things such as family history, things such as financial status, living situations, and myself included and other individuals have been not insulted, but talked down to by background investigators within law enforcement. And so making sure that those background investigators are being trained on their implicit bias, and they're being trained on how not to respond to individuals based on what they see that comes back from those documents. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes total sense. And that's a completely justifiable question. And I get that question. I would hate to hear that any of our background investigators were handling situations like that. I haven't heard of that from our background team. We take a lot of pride in what we do. It's a special ad hoc assignment that you have to apply for, you have to write memos for, you have to show your investigative prowess for, and then a selection is made whether or not you can even become part of that background investigation team. And then from there, you go on to separate certification trainings and specific legal trainings as to what you can ask, what you can't ask, what's protected information, what's medically protected information you can't question about, as well as the socioeconomic portion of credit checks and what you can and can't reference. And so I would hate to think somebody from our department was involved in like what you're talking about. And I'd like to know if it was, because I want to fix that. But at the same time, yes, we address those things, we go over those things, and it's supposed to be completely unbiased. Obviously, everybody's got their implicit bias. It'd be irrational to say that there's no way that you can go into a situation and not have some sort of preconceived notion of when you're talking to somebody. But the questions that they're trained to ask, and the style of question they're trained to ask, and is a more broad scope, to the point where you're not going to base anything on somebody's living location, their credit history alone, those things like that. We talk to neighbors, we talk to friends, we talk to friends of friends of friends, we talk to relatives. We're one of the very few agencies, if I think the only agency outside of OSP, that we travel for everything. So when it comes to a background investigation, we don't just simply make a phone call or send emails. We go to their location, we go to your house and we have a conversation with you. We talk to your spouse, your partner, whoever may be living with you at the time. Wherever your works were before, if you are from California within the last 10 years, we'll probably travel down there to contact people that you, from neighbors, see if they remember you, to get a huge overall picture about who you are as a person, where you stand ethically, morally, where your biases stand, whether or not you can be trusted to become part of a police department and be trusted within a community like this to work for them. So I kind of went off on a bit of a tangent there. I'm hoping I got your question in there. And I'm sure I probably stemmed some more questions for you.
Yeah, no, that is very helpful. I appreciate it a lot. One more question in regard to hiring.
Justin, if I could come back to you, if you could hold on to that question. Leah and Jason have been in the queue for a little while.
Absolutely.
Okay, thanks. Leah, if you'd like to go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm on a delay, but one of the things I was curious about is that you said that you table and are present at different functions, which I think is really important in the sense that it's hard for organizations to, it's hard for people, I think, to trust when they don't see you as part of their community. My question is though, do you collect those statistics, where you get folks from, where applicants come from? Like, do you know how they were recruited?
We have tracked those in the past, and I'm going to speak outside of specific information, like Tinseth would have that information directly, but I do know that those statistics weren't always helpful because we had such just a variety of applicants that came through, and a lot of the times, depending on what it is, whether it's protected information or not, we can't necessarily even ask it. Like if it has to do with sexual orientation, it has to do with anything like that. If we met you at some sort of event that had to do with that, it would be, I guess, counterintuitive to then request you to divulge that information for statistic purposes. I'm not saying it's not worth it, and I think it is worth it. I think we need to figure out a way to catalog it and characterize it so that we can, because without that knowledge, we have no way really to grow with a substantiated information in order to know that we're doing the right things, whether we're teaching our recruitment team how to do their job and how to reach out to the diverse members of our community, which, to be honest with you, the people of color within our community isn't the only diversity in our community. Our community is diverse as much more gamut than that.
Right. Yeah. No, it does seem like it would be useful to know whether your outreach is productive and to have some statistics on what's working and what isn't working. I have another question, but I'll be quiet now.
Officer Williams, I'm assuming you've got a point of information on some of the discussion that's been taking place, so go ahead.
I just wanted, yes, thank you. I just wanted to add to Justin's questions. He asked about the background investigators and maybe if a background investigator had a bias regarding the person they're investigating. Our background investigators do not get to make any personal comment about the person they're investigating. As a background investigator myself, we do not write our own belief whether a person is suitable for the position or not suitable. We only report the investigative details we find about the person. We do not get to play in any decision making. We just write a report on the information found, and that is referred to the background sergeant. And then the hiring supervisors who are overseeing that group of candidates, they review the memos and they get to decide. The background investigators are a total separate entity, and we don't get to give our personal preference or ideas about a candidate during the background.
Thank you very much. I see Jason, then Justin, and then Leah. We can go in that order.
Just a follow up to the background investigations are they looking specifically at white nationalism and If so, what are the types of questions you would ask friends or families? And then, whoever the decision maker is, what type of information, because sometimes it can be fairly difficult to separate where that line is. How do you tell?
Officer Williams, I see your hand up. I'm assuming that's again because you want to contribute on this one. Because I'm unable to see your face, it's very hard to tell.
I know, I really apologize. I wish you could.
No worries, but I think the hand up is working for now, so please go ahead.
Okay. So currently in our background investigations, when we are interviewing our candidates, we ask a series of questions regarding all types of bias. We also do a home visit. So we go into their home to see if there are any articles or any details that we can find of a person's specific bias. That's not all we're looking for, but we want to make sure that we are hiring people of good character. We also talk to a ton of references, people that they write down and people they do not write down. We want to know, and we ask them, have you ever seen them with any type of bias? So that people who know them well, if they have some inkling that a candidate has made a comment or attended a venue or is a part of a group that has a bias, that will flag the investigator to look more into that. We look at social media or open images to see if there are any indicators of any bias in that way as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Justin, if you'd like to go ahead.
Yeah, Kara, first of all, I just want to say thank you for answering that question. So my concern was not as much as background investigators making decisions based on implicit bias that they may have, but was merely based on how they begin to treat the applicant after that during times such as home visits and other things. And again, I hate to hit home this issue in particular, but I have experience with that where, me personally had some family who had a criminal history, was applying for law enforcement and was talked to in a specific way by a background investigator in my home in reference to my extended family's history, and the attitude and the posture they took was one that was very like, man, I withdrew from that process because of that investigator's attitude and response based on family history, and I've seen that multiple times with other individuals, even though the investigator wasn't inputting. The attitude, unfortunately, represented that whole department, and those individuals no longer felt safe applying or like they had an opportunity to apply in that environment. And so that was more why I was asking the question of my concern, not that the investigator could simply disqualify an individual. And then the other question I had, kind of based on what Leah said, is in reference to hosting tables for recruitment at various events. I think most people can agree that there are certain communities that are hesitant to trust law enforcement, even if there is a table at those events, such as Hispanic events for various individuals. Are there any restorative programs or things that have been done to make to kind of allow a community, even if EPD is hosting a table there, that they would feel like they have the ability to approach those tables? Simply because sometimes, and I'm not saying it's justified, but there are times where it is there anything restorative that's done to kind of mend those relationships so that those individuals feel comfortable approaching those tables or applying for those positions? Because we can have tables at events all day, but if there's a gap between that group, wherever the table is, there still very well is going to be a bridge that needs to be rebuilt. And so what's being done to make sure that is available or being done before we're just putting a table at those events? I hope that makes some kind of sense.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Justin. Ryan, if you've got anything to add on those, and then I'll call, and I see Officer Williams as well, and then we'll move on to Leah's question.
Yeah, Justin, to kind of address as far as liaison to different community programs and outreach communities within Eugene and Lane County. I can't speak to it specifically. Once again, I apologize that Ron's got a lot of this information, the specific side of things, but we do have assigned liaisons, and we have command staff as well that works to build that gap, bridge that gap, and make sure that they're aware of what our intentions are, and that we can have a cohesive environment for us to communicate with people in a safe environment for them to feel safe to come talk to us at those events. I feel bad about answering it so vaguely like this, but I would hate to give details that just aren't accurate. And so I apologize for not having more for that. When it comes to the review of the background investigators, as far as their demeanor and how they treat people and how they communicate with people, that I will speak to that a little bit when it comes down to, I review a lot of this stuff I review all of this stuff when it comes in and their packets and the questions, and I also end up speaking to candidates. And if there's ever a question of treatment that comes up, or ever a question of somebody's demeanor or how they felt the officer was treating them or detective was treating them when they were doing that investigation, I pull their background investigations, I talk to them, and I review their conduct and their investigations from previous investigations to make sure that there's not an issue that I've either missed or that they're not representing our department in a professional and appropriate manner. And if they are, then they're removed from this team. This is a special assignment, and this is an opportunity for our department to reach the community in a lot of different ways, not just for the background that we're doing. So it's an important role. And if they're not fulfilling that role in a professional manner, then they'll be coached on that and most likely removed.
Is there a process for applicants to report scenarios like that?
There's not an actual process. It's more of a check-in that's done by me or the recruitment officer based on the information we get in and talking to the background investigator as well. And sometimes people will call us and just say, hey, and we reach out to them constantly throughout the process. And if they have questions like that, they'll reach out to us and talk to us. I've received those phone calls before. We don't have an actual set process for that, which is, not necessarily a bad idea. It's something I'd have to figure out how we would go about doing that while still conducting the investigation to the full extent.
Thank you very much. Sorry, Justin. Were you just going to say thank you there?
Oh, I was just saying thank you. Yeah, I appreciate it.
Cool. Officer Williams, then I see Leah, and then Jason.
I think Sergeant Maloney covered the piece.
Leah, if you'd like to go ahead.
Yeah, I have two questions. One, I guess I hear the rigor that you're using for background checks, and that's really great to hear. And I think that I'm trying to make the process as standard and legal. But I do think and I will say this as an employee of the county where we've had to deal with a lot of these issues, sometimes when we standardize things, I think we miss out on being culturally appropriate or welcoming. And I'm just wondering if there's been any effort to look at whether or not, so our experience, my experience is that many of the things that we do that we say are neutral aren't really neutral at all. They have a bias, and they're really, the way white people like to do things. So my question about that is whether there's been any work done to look at whether there could be culturally specific ways to go about background checks in order to avoid some of the things Justin was talking about, and also to make sure that you're not missing folks who might be put off by that process. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Would you like to ask your second question as well, or would you like to wait till you get the answer to this one?
It's a little bit different, so maybe this.
Okay, let's cover this and then go ahead, Sergeant Maloney.
So yeah, so that makes sense to me. And yes, what part of like Kara's job, and she can probably speak to this in specifics as well as mine, is to constantly be reviewing that stuff. So the types of questioning, the style of questioning, to make sure that we're always refining our background process to make sure that we're not excluding anyone, or we're not causing undue offense. Like, we're not actually offending people on accident just based on the line of questioning that we need to get answered so that we can figure out if they're suited for the position or not. To answer your question specifically regarding cultural differences, I wouldn't say there's any specific, like, we need to figure out exactly what's going on with this one thing. It's an overview of we need to be all inclusive to everything, including non-gender specific, as well as people of color, as well as religious concerns and that kind of stuff. And so we're always kind of trying to evolve, and we're always trying to figure out exactly the best way to go about that. And sometimes we learn through this process that we didn't even go on the right line of questioning, that we need to revisit this and get answers to these things before we make a decision on anything.
Well, and how, like, is there a body of science or work out there that would help guide you in that process, or is it just you guys talking to each other?
Well, there's, like you said, there's standards, there's the standardized practice and stuff, but like, I agree with you, when you just follow straight standardized practice, you can exclude a lot of options there, and you can actually not even find out how somebody can really benefit a police department or a community in that position because of standardized question. It excludes certain information sometimes. There isn't really any set way to go about that as far as like a training. Kara and I myself we were scheduled for another training already to address these issues nationally, to see what people are doing on a national level to make sure we're on pace with that. It got canceled due to COVID, so we're trying to work through that. As far as out of my office, we're always looking for books to read, people to talk to, webinars to follow, everything we can do to make sure that we're evolving as a police department and being more inclusive to everyone that could possibly want to be a police officer and police a community that they live in. So I can't say there's like a manual that says you'll do this, this, and this, but we're trying to make it as broad as we can so that we can be accepting of everything.
Yeah, I mean, that is the problem with much of this work, is that it's hard to find that instruction manual. The other thing I wanted to just ask real quickly is sort of what your rate of success is in terms of hiring people from diverse communities, and then what's the success rate like? So one of the things, again, I'm talking from our own experience at the county, is that we find that people leave pretty quickly. So I'm just wondering if you're having that experience as well. So retention is what I meant. Retention
of like a specific diverse group, or just retention in general?
Well, when you look at people who are in the minority on your force, what's the retention like?
I'd say our retention is above average, the way as far as the national scale to it. Retention in general for police departments is always difficult because this job, when people apply for it and then they get hired and they start working, they find out it's not exactly what they thought it was. And they find out that it's just not for them. They don't want to do it, or they're just not up to standards in order to do that sort of work. And so we have to make those decisions. Our hiring practices they're set up, and we've talked to multiple national agencies on how to make sure that we're not excluding any diverse groups whatsoever, and that we're allowing for different fluctuation in our testing so that we get as much diversity as we can. When it comes to diversity hires in general, I would say, I don't have the exact numbers, Ron would have that, but our retention is really high. The only time where we lose anybody is just based on performance, or they just don't like it anymore as far as a job, but that's kind of where we're at.
Thank you.
Okay, Officer Williams, and then I'd like to move on to Jason. But before you start, Officer Williams, I'd just like to very quickly suggest, we tend to use the term marginalized groups because I think there's been a lot of sort of nomenclature, people not quite knowing what to say. So I'd like to suggest that we use marginalized groups as a general category to stop sort of tripping over our words. If there's any pushback from committee members, I'm very happy to shift that nomenclature, but that way we cover all of the different possible manifestations of diversity without needing to feel that we're excluding people by not stating all of them every single time. So let me know, committee members, if you have an issue with that, but otherwise I'll hand over to Officer Williams.
I just wanted to reiterate what Sergeant Maloney said regarding our retention rates. I ran our current numbers as of yesterday for patrol all the way up to our deputy chief in numbers. And I was actually pretty happy to see that so many people, I've been here 19 years, and most of the people that my entire class, which was a large class, are still hired with the police department in various ranks and positions. But most of the officers that we have hired in my time here are still employed in different ranks within the city. And we do not have a high turnover rate. When people come on to EPD, they stay with us. We have been fortunate to hire several laterals from other agencies who have joined our force and intend and have even retired from our police department with a full career. And then the question was asked about how we're getting people to actually come to the booths for our recruitment. Although we don't keep tabs on who we hire or who actually goes through the hiring process from the recruitment booths. In the short time that I've been doing these recruitment efforts, I've been at the recruitment booths. And so I'm familiar with the faces that come to the booth, and then we see them during the interview process or the background process. And so I know that we are reaching some people who are going through the ranks and are successful. We've hired several of the people. I can think of two just offhand that went through a women in policing booth that we had that are, they have more than 5 years on now with the police department. But specifically, since I've taken this position, we have specifically chosen individuals who broadly represent all people in our community. We've reached out to certain officers who've shown an interest in recruiting people and reaching out to communities that they have been a member or participant in, specific groups, so that people do feel more comfortable coming and talking to us because they can identify with the person at the booth. As I wish you could see me, I'm a 5 foot, almost 3 petite female. And I can say that when I was looking at a police career, walking up to a table of large white males was very overwhelming for me. I didn't feel like I fit into that, although I had a high drive that is still what I wanted to do. And so I can understand having caution, feeling like that the police career maybe isn't a part of something that I belong to because I don't identify with the people who are at the booth. And that is really important to us. We absolutely are taking that into consideration and trying to broaden who we have at our recruitment booths so that people more identify with those people and can have those conversations, and we can get more diversity in our hiring pool.
Thank you very much, Officer Williams. Jason, I'll bring you in, and then after that, I'd like to take a little temperature check because there are a bunch of other questions that have already been asked. I'd like to make sure we get to those. So Jason, please go ahead.
Thank you. First, thank you, Officer Williams. I know that DPD, in my experience, has always done a very good job at those types of functions and having diverse representation. The question, again, I think I have that I've asked before is, can we get a copy of the current workforce statistics for EPD, if not the city, just so that we can see things around recruitment by race, by gender, any other sort of protected class statistics that you might be collecting as just regular course of, action for applications. The second thing is during the course of selection or onboarding, do you actually do any sort of implicit bias testing, particularly like shoot, don't shoot exercises?
I think Jeremy might be the best person to answer the statistics question. And then Sergeant Maloney, if you jump in on the implicit bias one.
So Jason, regarding the statistics, your request for them was definitely heard before. I apologize if you have not heard an update on the progress on that. That is still in the works. They just weren't really available, and there was a little bit of cleanup that needed to be done with the database because it's gone through some adjustments in the past couple of years to just try and clean it up so we could provide that. So that is in the process. That's something that the ERC is working on, or the Employee Resource Center is working on. And we're hoping to have those released here fairly soon. It just is taking a little longer than we had planned. So hopefully we'll have them to you very soon.
I appreciate that update. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeremy. Sergeant Maloney, if you'd like to go ahead.
Regarding your implicit bias question, as far as shoot, don't shoot scenarios on the onboarding process, that kind of thing, we follow, when it comes to our line of questioning, the interviews, like after people have passed the standardized written test that's standardized nationally, it's a variety, it's 4 different sections of things that it's testing people on. Once you pass that and you move on to oral boards, that's where we actually really get to meet you. We get to know you as far as a person. And our line of questioning is always based around hiring for attitude and your demeanor and moral character, moral compass, where you fit in the community as far as helping the community and how you help people, your empathy levels and that kind of thing. We have those types of questions, and then we also do have the questions similar like what you'd mentioned, like shoot, don't shoot, direct use of force questions. And we have those questions not necessarily as an implicit biased orientation, but a fact-based question as to whether or not people understand that what they're applying to become as a police officer can be very dangerous at times, and whether or not they're willing to accept that danger and that risk, knowing that it's a reality for them at that time. The more the implicit bias focus on things really goes into that whole extensive background check as to whether or not we figure out if you just can talk well and you can get through an interview and you can give sort of lip service in that interview. That's why our backgrounds are so extensive, because it's very, very difficult to hide anything when you start talking to everybody that you know and looking at all your social media presence and everything that you post on the internet and that kind of stuff.
Officer Williams, I see your hand up if you'd like to add to that answer.
I just wanted to add that along with the implicit bias, our background investigators and the interview panel members, so the people on the oral board, are all given instruction and some training on implicit bias so that they are more aware of those things before they're interviewing a candidate and when they're conducting the background investigations.
Thank you very much. Justin, go ahead. And then I'd like to take a little step back for a moment. After your question.
Officer Williams, can you provide more detail on what kind of in-depth of what that training is for those individuals?
Just recently, our background investigators attended an 8-hour background investigator update class. And part of that was on implicit bias, specifically knowing that everyone, they come from a different background, history. Everybody's journey in life is different. And those experiences can shape ideas about people, and that you need to put your personal ideas aside, and that you need to evaluate the person based on just the information that they're providing to you at the time, not any beliefs or ideas that you hold about a particular group or person. But that's as specific as I can get, but generally everyone is given the same instruction. And our ERC also comes in to give some direction to our interview panel at the time of hire.
Okay, and then what's the frequency of that kind of a training? And then I know you said that the broad training is 8 hours. Do you know how much specific dedicated time goes to addressing implicit bias, whether that's 30 minutes, an hour and a half? And then again, the frequency of that, whether it's annually, every 2 years, every 5 years?
So we, in the past, have not had routine update training for our background investigators. Sergeant Maloney and I are new in our assignments, and we have been working really closely with the Department of Public Safety Training and Standards. And we identified that our investigators needed and deserved updated training on a more frequent basis. And so our updated training will be every year for in-person training. And then we give any updates via email updated training. I can't tell you how many minutes. I'm sure I talked longer about it during the training this last time than anybody was listening, but it was at least 30 minutes was covered with implicit bias at this last training. And that's in addition to the ethics and bias training that the entire department receives during in-service training. So this is totally separate and in addition to the regular routine training that we would receive from the department. And the training that the panel for new hires receives, we usually have about an hour-long briefing before our interview day. And so sometime within that hour, ERC is covering that information with the panel.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Officer Williams. Sergeant Maloney, if you'd like to go ahead.
Yeah, just to kind of piggyback on that a little bit, Justin, for you, that I wasn't very clear on the first time I'd said it. When it comes to our actual interview oral board process, those questions are vetted through our ERC, formerly our human resources, to make sure that there's no implicit bias statements in there, or that we're being biased toward any group or marginalized group that may be in there applying for a job with us. So, and part of that process is it comes down to the fact that the questions are read and the follow-up questions are specifically stated so that no person that shows up for an interview will get a different leading question or different question based on what we think at the time of their answer, so that it keeps everything standardized, which obviously brings its own problems in sometimes, but it makes it so that we can remove some of those implicit biases by fact-based questions and allowing everybody the same platform to answer them.
Okay, thank you, Sergeant Maloney. We have just hit hour one. I'd like to take a little bit of a step back, because in the questions, especially the ones that were posed by Leah and by Midas, there were a couple of themes that emerged. And with your permission, Leah and Midas, I'd like to restate those questions. And perhaps it might be more efficient to have Sergeant Maloney and Officer Williams cover those areas in general. So moving on to the subject of training rather than hiring, again, with your permission. Trying to split this meeting into 50%. So essentially, both of you asked, about the nature of the training. How are the trainers chosen? How often are they switched out? What processes there are for vetting them, and whether there's any kind of civilian review or outside review of, I assume, both the trainers who are in EPD as employees and external trainers. So if I've kind of synthesized those two elements that you both stated correctly, please let me know. Or if you have any objections or if there's anything I've missed, because I feel that these come together quite well. And before I go on, Jason, I see your hand raised, so if there's anything you'd like to add to that.
And my my typical question, as you probably know, this is Jason smiling, is what is the diversity, especially racial diversity of the trainers?
Okay, so Sergeant Maloney and Officer Williams, just to reiterate, it's a question of who are the trainers in terms of their diversity, how are they chosen, how often are they switched, and is there any civilian review or possibility for civilian review of both internal training and things that are brought in from outside. And I see Lieutenant San Miguel, you haven't said very much so far, so I'd like you to give you to have the opportunity to speak first if you like.
So I'm actually in charge of the training division right now. So I believe Leah's first question was in regard to our field training officers. So these are the officers that are training our new recruits in the field. So she had asked if we had, you know, the number of trainers we have. We have about 25 to 30 field training officers in the field. And they're very diverse. They're a very diverse group of officers, and they're selected by our chain of command. And we really select officers that, in our opinion, do good police work, that treat people professionally, fairly. They understand the laws, they do things right, they follow policies and procedures. Those are the people that we look for to be good trainers. When we're doing a selection process for someone to become a trainer, we also do a internal affairs review and a performance check on them. So we speak with people from the auditor's office and from internal affairs, and we look at, you know, does this person get complaints from civilians very often? Have they had complaints for violating people's civil rights? Have they had use of force complaints? We look at those things when we're selecting our field training officers, because we obviously don't want officers who have issues in those areas training new recruits, because it's a very influential position. So in regard to our field training of recruits, after they've graduated from our local academy and then the state academy, I believe Leah asked this question as well, how many field trainers do they have once they hit the street? So they basically have 4 rotations of trainers. Each rotation is about 5 weeks. So they are with 4 different officers during the course of their training, because officers do things differently. They all generally follow the same policies and procedures and laws and stuff like that, but their styles are different. Some people just talk to people differently. Some people are better with certain situations. And so we wanted them to get a well-rounded viewpoint of law enforcement. So they do get 4 different trainers. And truth be told, sometimes recruits have a personality conflict with one of their trainers, and you don't want their entire experience as a recruit officer to be with someone that maybe they don't see eye to eye on or eye to eye with. So you want a broad review of that. And we have taken field training officers who have had use of force complaints and stuff like that, and we've removed them from the program and or done remedial training for them. So we realize that being a field training officer is one of the most important jobs in the department. And
just for context, how many officers in total? You said 30 trainers to how many officers?
So we have 25 to 30 field training officers, but when they're assigned a recruit in the field, it's just 1 officer per recruit.
Oh, sorry if I wasn't clear. I meant in the entire department. So just to give a sense of what the ratio is.
We have about 220 sworn officers, but some of those are sergeants and lieutenants. I think we have 160 officers. So we have about 30 that are trainers.
Okay. Officer Williams, I see you, and then Midas, I see you.
I was gonna say that as of yesterday, we had 134 actual officers working patrol. So those were not detectives or supervisors that are sworn, but just on patrol.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Midas, please go ahead, and then Jason.
Yeah, just a question or two. Those FTOs, is there any sort of, like, I don't know the right way to ask this, I'd say term limit, or are they reevaluated at any point? Is it a yearly reevaluation, or is it just kind of they are in that position until they do something to lose that position?
They are continually evaluated. So every day they do a daily observation report on their recruit, and myself and the field training sergeant, as well as their lieutenant and their sergeant, reviews their daily observation reports and make sure that they're having their officer go to a lot of calls, they're having their officer write good reports, they're documenting everything they do in training. They also follow up on that by watching the body cameras of the field training officers and the recruits, just, you know, to make sure that the field training officers are doing a good job. We try to do quarterly trainings and updates with our field training officers. It doesn't always happen, but they do get training every year, and we try to keep them current on field training, but they're really kind of continually evaluated because we're always looking at their performance and their reports and their investigations and body cams, those sort of things.
Okay, Kaz, can I ask my next question now, or should I get back in line?
If we let Jason go, he's had his hand up for a little while, and then we'll swing back around.
Well, let Midas go. That's
okay,
fine.
Fair enough. Go ahead, Midas.
Yeah, so I'm just trying to jog my memory. Let me go next. Sorry, I lost my train of thought.
Okay, no worries. Civilian review, that was one other thing you asked about of trainings that I have noted down. Okay, I think we've moved on. Jason, go ahead.
Just again to restate my question, what are the numbers of, in terms of the racial diversity of the training staff?
Whichever officer is best equipped, and you know, rough ideas. Like I don't think we would have the ability to say in detail.
When you talk about training staff, we have our field training officers in the field who sit in the car every night with the recruits and work with them one-on-one. There's that group of field training officers. But in regard to other trainers, we also have, let's say, I'll use our defensive tactics team for an example. We have a defensive tactics team that Sergeant Maloney is actually in charge of. And I think we have 9 officers on the team. 2 of them are people of color. We don't currently have any women on the team, but I was on the team at one point. I don't know what the statistics are on every training team that we have, but I do know that particularly when it comes to the field training officers, we want a diverse group of field training officers. For example, when we hire a female police officer, we would like for at least one of her field training officers to be a woman, just because there's a different experience, there's shared experiences, there's commonality. So, you know, we really want a variety of field trainers.
Again, can somebody answer my question, please? Or get me the numbers?
I could do the research, but honestly, I would be making it up if I just answered your question because I don't know what the statistics are. I know, like on the defensive tactics team, what the percentages of marginalized communities are, you know, or people on the team, but I don't know the numbers, so I would be making it up, and I don't want to do that.
Jason, I've made a note of your request, and after this meeting, I'll send it in writing to the folks at EPD. And we'll try and get you some hard statistics. And then I see Midas and then Leah.
Okay, yeah. So I'm just trying to get a little better idea of the procedure with all this for the FTOs. When an FTO is assigned to a recruit, do they still have other police duties, or does that become their focus 100%?
That is their focus 100%. They ride in the car with the recruit officer. They go to every call with the recruit. They stand next to the recruit when the recruit interviews people. They sit next to them when they write reports. They go into the jail with them when they have a custody. Everything they do is taking care of that recruit and teaching the recruit step by step by step. So they're still cops, but their job is to teach the recruits.
Mm-hmm. And do FTOs, do they have time in between recruits to do normal patrol stuff, or is it after they finish with one recruit, do they move on to the next?
Generally, they have time in between recruits. We don't normally hire enough people at any given time to keep our recruits or our FTOs busy year round. So you might have a recruit for a month, and then for a couple months, you won't have a recruit. Some of our really good FTOs that we like to utilize a lot, they'll be a little bit busier just because we like to use them. We know they're really good at their jobs, but they're not busy enough that they are only training recruits. They have months that go by where they don't have a recruit.
Do you have any idea what a little bit busier looks like? Do you know if they're spending more time, like let's say your most valuable FTOs, are they spending more time training than on the streets? Is it evenly split? Do you have any idea on that off the top of your head?
I don't have a number off the top of my head. I would say our best FTOs, and this is just a guess again, is, they might have a recruit 3, 4, 5 months out of the year, and then the rest of the time they don't.
Got it.
We also don't want to burn people out too, because it's a lot of work to be an FTO. It's a lot of responsibility to take care of another person, continually.
All right, no further questions.
All right, thank you very much, Midas. Leah, you're up next.
So I'm gonna make one comment. And this is not unique to any organization, because we've had this problem too. If we're not paying attention to the data, then we don't know, right? We all want to have really diverse trainers, or we really want to have our folks succeed. But if we're not looking at the numbers, we don't really know. So I'm just wondering if there's a plan to kind of really track that, to know whether or not the goals are being reached. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it makes sense, but I guess from my own experience, when I look at it, I look at the defensive tactics team, particularly because I've been working with them a lot lately, and they're a very diverse team. They're really reflective of the overall organization. Field training officers, it's really reflective of the officers that we have. And so I don't think any particular groups, whether it's people of color or women, are underrepresented in those areas. Kara was a field training officer. I was a field training officer. I believe they're pretty fairly represented, although I don't have the numbers to, say specifically what they are.
Yeah, would there be a problem with monitoring that? Or I guess I'm interested in making sure that we have data to make sure. It's not that I don't trust you. I know in my own organization, things that we thought were going swimmingly, when we actually looked at the data, not so much.
Yeah, and we can look at the data. We don't have a problem with that. However, when we make the selections for these positions, we're making the selection based on the qualities and the skill sets of the officers, not necessarily because of their race or because they're a woman, those sort of things. But we're making the decisions based on their skill sets. I think it's fine to look at those things. We want to have you know, diverse trainers. So I personally don't have any problems looking at those things. And I'm surprised my dog didn't start barking in response to whoever that was.
My dog started barking. That's why I had to go move her. So sorry about that.
Did you catch the full answer, Leah, or would you like it repeated?
I did. I just thank you.
Okay. There was a question, another couple of questions that we covered, which Leah asked about how people are evaluated or held accountable with regards to, I assume, failing training or succeeding in training. And then there was also a question about what the mandatory training schedule was. I'm not sure whether you meant for officers in general or for the trainers on that one, Mia.
Both probably, mostly for the officers in general. And really what I'm curious about is not just the training for their work requirements, but also training for the issues that we're talking about, anti-bias or what often falls into that category of diversity and inclusion. And how much of that happens, and are folks, how are they evaluated or held accountable? Is that clear?
So we do have annual training on diversity, implicit bias, those sort of things. Every year, you know, it takes on a different name. You know, sometimes it has to do with disabilities, and sometimes it has to do with inclusion and implicit bias. It takes the name changes every year, but we do have annual training on those topics in various areas. And it's pretty widespread, the type of training that we get in those areas. And it is annual.
Okay, I see Jason, and then Midas has sent something through on chat just saying that he's got some other questions. So Jason, if you'd like to go ahead, then I will swim back to see if any of the questions that were asked at the beginning haven't been covered to people's satisfaction. And then I'll let Midas come in with a new tranche of questions. Jason, please go ahead.
So are you saying that diversity, equity, inclusion training only happens once a year? Or how is it?
It is required. It is required by policy to happen once a year, but it really happens throughout the year. We have those pieces of those training kind of wrapped up in our other training. So like if we do scenario-based training, we may have elements of that in our scenario-based training and things like that.
And just who designs that?
So if it's, say we're doing defensive tactics training and we want to put a component of that in, it'll be the defensive tactics team that does that. We sometimes have outside entities that come in and teach implicit bias. Sometimes it's in-house, sometimes it's our crisis intervention people that will train on those areas. We've had specialists in autism and disabilities come in. It's a myriad of trainers that participate, some in-house, some outside.
And just as a very quick addition to that as well, Jason, EPD officers are also City of Eugene employees. So any city mandatory training that's delivered through the Employee Resource Center would also go through, I think in pretty much every case, but Lieutenant San Miguel, correct me if I'm wrong on that one.
No, you're correct. The city does provide those kind of trainings.
And do you track completion rates for those?
I didn't hear your question. I'm sorry.
Apologies. Do you track or does the city track completion rates for those mandatory courses?
Yes, we have a learning management system in the city that they track when we attend in-house city trainings. As far as sworn police officers, those are also tracked through DPSST if they're put on outside of the city environment.
And Jason, if you have any more technical questions, please send them through to me. I'll pass them on to our folks at the ERC, and they will be able to answer you in far more detail than I think anyone who's present here tonight. So I also just want to take a quick check in terms of any of the questions that were asked at the top of the meeting. If any committee members feel there's something that's been missed, please raise your hand. But if not, Midas. Okay, Justin, go ahead, and then I'll move on to Midas unless anyone else feels they've been missed.
So there's maybe something that Midas brings up in a little bit, but I know earlier, Midas, when you spoke, you had talked about the psych evaluation and kind of that process. I'm just curious, I have a question in regard to that. I'm curious, like, how is the psych the person who's doing the psych evaluations, is there a selection process for that individual, and what is the vetting process for that individual? You know, just because someone's a licensed psychologist doesn't mean they may be qualified to seek out specific things that EPD may be looking for. And so how is that person vetted, and what does that contract with them look like?
I'm probably the best person here to address that question. When it comes to the psychological evaluation, when the psychologist that's chosen by the department in order to be contracted out by the department is always under review when it comes to their findings, what they're looking for, whether or not they have their own implicit biases that are causing problems in their review. We have in the past, just prior to me coming into this position, we had a psychologist that showed a propensity to not be what we thought was a fair evaluation of the people that had put in or had taken the psych evaluation. So that process through the ERC, we excluded that psychologist, and we started reaching out for other psychologists and finding ones that are trained in this sort of evaluation. In which case we have now a different one. Her name is Cerise. She's based out of Seattle, and then she comes down here specifically for the one-on-one meets pre-COVID. Now during COVID, she does like Zoom meetings and that kind of stuff for her one-on-ones after they've finished their multi-booklet test and everything that they do as far as the writing exercises.
Okay, thank you.
That psychologist that was excluded, do you know how long he was the contracted individual for EPD before he was excluded?
You know, I'm just kind of ballparking here. I think it was less than 2 years. I don't know exactly how long, but during that time frame, as far as the amount of recruits that we had hired for them during that time period, I don't think was very much. It wasn't until basically when I came into this role and just before that we started really ramping up to get ourselves, because we had the funding to get back to like a minimum national standard for our actual staffing.
Thank you, Sergeant Maloney. Leah, can I just check in to see if you have an unanswered question from before or a new one? If it's an unanswered one, please go ahead. Otherwise, I'd like to move on to Midas.
Move ahead to Midas. Thank you.
Okay, Midas, please go ahead. You've been waiting patiently.
Yeah, directly in line with what was just being discussed. So actually just that recent answer, that gives me a new question. Just hearing that this person was in the department for 2 years and they were later found to not be suitable for the task, that's pretty frightening. What is being done to make sure that a situation like that doesn't happen again, where we have a psychologist performing these evaluations that isn't suitable?
The evaluation, as far as the line of questioning and the application process that the psychologist goes through, is directly related to the ERC and their standards that they have set forth, plus national certifications and standards that have been recently put in place, as well as our command staff making those decisions. I don't have any say in that. I don't know exactly what that is. That would be more or less a question for Lieutenant Tinseth. Unfortunately, he's not here. But when I say that we decided not to go with this person, it wasn't anything that was unethical going on, but it seemed that they just kept focusing in on one centralized topic rather than the gamut of the person that they're evaluating. And so the department didn't feel that was all-inclusive enough to continue the employment with that psychologist. It wasn't like there was an ethical issue or there was some issue with the people that they hired or chose not to hire, or chose not to pass. But when it comes down to the actual evaluations of the psychologist, the psychologist meets with the entire command staff up to the chief to discuss the findings from the test and their interviews, and then allows basically the chief, when it comes down to it, his decision on whether or not that person is suited for law enforcement based on a standard that's been put into practice throughout the nation when it comes to psychological evaluation.
Got it. And am I correct in understanding that you have just one psychologist on staff for this at a time?
Yeah, we just have one on contract right now. Okay.
And then when I asked questions at the last meeting when we were talking about this, let me find this. They said the psych eval was composed or included a 4 to 5 hour psychology questionnaire. Is that just a standard Myers-Briggs, or is it something different?
It's not as standard as a Myers-Briggs, but it is a standardized MMPI test and an MPI and a PIE test. There's MPIE. I think that's the acronym. I'd have to look it up really quick, or I can have Jeremy send that info to you.
Yeah, I'd like that.
It's a packet full of 4 different tests that they go through, and there's hundreds of questions in there. So it's set up so that you can ask multiple questions basically in multiple different ways, so that you can potentially kind of vet out people that are trying to be untruthful.
Yeah. And then am I correct in seeing that the interview with the psychologist is only 45 to 60 minutes? It's just one of those.
There is one. I couldn't quote you on the exact time frame of that.
Yeah, about that though.
Yeah, probably around there. I mean, I've heard of them going upwards of 4 hours, but the average time I'm sure is probably under that, because they're reviewing everything from those tests and those things that came out, and they're asking clarifying questions. And honestly, that's above my rate of intelligence on that. I don't really know the exact line of questioning on it. So. Yeah,
for sure. And this is definitely something we're going to be discussing more. I just wonder if you have any thoughts on the fact that you can give someone a Myers-Briggs test 4 times over 4 weeks and get 4 completely different results. You can go see a therapist 4 times over 4 different weeks and have 4 completely different sessions. Is there anything you guys do to, it just sounds like that there's not much of a large sample size to be pulling these conclusions from.
Well, I think when the psychologist pulls from these, they're pulling from national databases, and it's not a pass-fail numbering system as much as it's a rate and on a scale of where they fit within those scales of acceptability.
All right, that's all. Thanks.
Okay, Leah, if you'd like to go ahead, and just in terms of a time check, we are at 7:35, so we have about 25 minutes remaining. I'd like to reserve the last 10 minutes to talk about next steps. But Leah, please, your question.
So I have a couple of questions about how external trainers and trainings are chosen. Something that came up in a different committee meeting is a training that my understanding, and if I'm incorrect, I'm wrong, that there was a de-escalation training, for example, scheduled, sponsored by the Force Science Training Organization, and which has a problematic record of not promoting de-escalation. So that came up as a question, and I just wondered, how are the external trainings that are brought into the force, how are they evaluated, And how do we make sure that they're, several of these large training organizations have been shown lately to have connections to white supremacy. Some of their trainers having connections to white supremacy organizations. So how do we make sure that that doesn't happen here?
So generally how we choose our outside trainers is we will select some of our subject matter experts, whether it's defensive tactics or crisis intervention. We will send one or two of our instructors to the training, or we'll send our sergeants or lieutenants, people from our command staff, and have them vet the training. And in regard to force science has historically done a lot of training regarding officer use of force and studying the reasons that officers use force and stuff like that. And I understand that they kind of have a bad rap in some respects. However, like everything in law enforcement, force science is also evolving, and they realize this country, I think, is changing, and they have kind of changed and started putting a lot more emphasis on crisis intervention, on de-escalation. So when we saw that they had a de-escalation training, we vetted it, and I have the PowerPoint and all of that, and it is really a good training. It really does teach how to de-escalate, you know, the different steps you can take in different scenarios. It's very detailed in de-escalation. It is not the force aspect that their class has been in the past. So all I can say is our subject matter experts or our chain of command will vet those before we bring them in and expose, you know, the entire department to them. And, you know, force science is one that, you know, we understand that there is this perception that that's all they do is defend officer use of force, but really it's not all they do. And they're changing and developing, as is everyone else. So when we get trainings like that, we vet them first.
Thank you for that. Sorry, Leah, go ahead.
Just one, like, about how often do you bring trainings in? Do you think, you know, like, you know, average year, is it 4 times or?
In an average year, I would say 4 to 6. With that being said, this last year was not average because of COVID, so we had to cancel a lot. So 4 to 6, maybe more, on some of the more specific trainings, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, do we have any other questions, either ones that haven't been covered from previously or any new ones that people would like to bring up? Leah?
Yeah, I do have one question, different subject. Just we're focusing a lot on recruits, just thinking about the white supremacy and concerns of that nature. I'm wondering if there's any review on that for folks who have been on the force. Is there any kind of review to make? Because, so a couple, I'm not saying that this happens here, but clearly there's ways to kind of ghost your social media so that you can get a job. So I'm just wondering if there's any ongoing efforts to check in on that with your staff over time.
So I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think what you're asking me is, once somebody's been hired as a police officer, do we follow up on how their social media is trending, what they're doing to make sure that we didn't miss something? Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, not just with new recruits, but with people who've been on the force for a while.
Right. Yes and no. We don't do such an intrusive thing like a background investigation, but we do their annual evaluations and as far as their performance, that kind of stuff. And we also pay attention if there's any trends with them as to whether or not we need to look into what's going on with them outside of work so that we can figure out why this is going on or what the decisions they're making and how it's relative to what's going on in their lives. Just as a human side, an empathetic and sympathetic side to just that we're all people and we have lives outside of our careers. And then we have anytime they put in for any sort of ad hoc assignment or any sort of promotion or anything like that, we reopen what is in essence called a performance review. But what that is that's an internalized background investigation revisited. So we pull their previous file, go through that, and then we adjust that along with their work performance, as well as the new friends they've made throughout their time here and that kind of stuff, to be more extensive, to make sure that, one, we're not promoting somebody into a more of a command structure process that's potentially problematic, as well as we're maintaining the fact that the officers are still on the baseline for who they were when we first hired them.
Thank you.
Okay, I see Officer Williams, and then Midas, and then Justin.
I wanted to add regarding the question, if we find new information on someone who's currently employed, your background as a sworn person or any EPD personnel, your background is always open. And we make that very clear at the time of background. The investigator goes over that with the applicant, that at the time of the interview, during the investigation, or after employment, if anything is discovered that would make you disqualified to be an employee or represent the city of Eugene, that you will be terminated, your employment would be terminated. So if information did come out that we missed something in the background, or sometimes there's just no way to find that information, and sometimes people's behaviors change. And if something new did come up, your background is open, and that would be open for review at that time.
Thank you.
Midas, if you'd like to go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. Just a quick question. So is there anything in place, or is there any, I'm guessing there's not. If an officer is in training, are the people that they work with alerted to that at any point? Sorry, the civilians that they are working with on a call, let's say.
Oh yeah, that was one of your earlier questions. So yeah, Sergeant Maloney.
Sorry, I guess I don't understand what your question is. Can you repeat it for me?
Totally. As I get pulled over by an officer, and he's in the part of his training where he's taking 25% of the work, and his FTO is taking the 75%. If he comes up to my car and there's two officers, they say, I'm Officer so-and-so, and this is a recruit in training so-and-so, or is that just information left out?
That information is, we do not readily identify them as a recruit, because we want citizens to, see them as an officer and them to react accordingly, because they've received their full cadre of training. They are a sworn police officer at this point. They can take enforcement action. They can make arrests. So we do not identify them as recruits. It's usually pretty obvious that they're a recruit, because they will pretty much have their field training officer standing right next to them. And when they're really new and they're in that first phase, when they're doing 25% of the work and the FTO is helping them with 75%, it's pretty obvious they're a recruit, because they generally will look to the FTO for guidance. But we don't advertise that they're a recruit or put a tag on them that says officer in training or anything like that.
Got it. Thank you.
Justin? Justin?
Sorry. Yeah, sorry, I was on mute. What is everything that's covered in the annual reviews? Usually how long and how extensive is that process? Who performs it? And then if there is anything found to be concerning, are those individuals immediately taken off of patrol, or what is the process during the time they're being evaluated if something does come up in those reviews?
Well, it's going to be their direct supervisor that does that annual review, and as far as their annual evaluation. When it comes to whether or not they're directly taken off patrol, that's obviously something where if something came up to that level, or something came to our identification as far as that wouldn't take an annual review time in order to address that. That would be addressed immediately in the moment. And if it was at a level where somebody needed to be placed on administrative leave and an investigation done in order to find out exactly what happened, it would be done at that time, and it would go up the chain all the way to the chief for the decision on that.
Thank you.
Okay, if anyone else has any more questions, we have about 5 minutes remaining. I'm hopeful that the next steps that I have won't take the full time. But if you like, I can move on to the next steps and then give you, if we have a few minutes left at the end, we can use that time for questions. So if nobody objects, or if people want a little bit of time, because we've been through a huge amount of information in this, and go ahead, Sergeant Maloney.
Yeah, before, just in case I get shut down there, Midas, you had, I can't remember exactly what the number or the statistic or the information that you wanted that I was going to send to you. If you can just remind me really quick, I'll write it down. That way I don't forget.
Yeah, it was the specific name of the test that they take, the 4 to 6 hour. The statistic that we weren't sure on was just how long they talk with the therapist or the psychologist, which wasn't as important, but the name of the 4 to 6 hour test, psychology test, that was the info I needed.
Yeah, that was actually going to be one of the things that I covered in next steps, because we've had a lot of further information requests. I think I've made notes of them. I believe Kevin has as well, and we do have the recording. But if you could please email myself and Kevin with anything that you have in your own notes, just to make sure that we're 100% certain that we have it. That's one of the next steps. Obviously, where we need to move to from here is to start putting together motions now to be brought to the next committee meeting. Again, I'm going to offer myself, if people want to have discussions about some of the lessons that we've learned from previous iterations. We've been through several subcommittees here. I think one of the things that we've learned is that being overly specific can sometimes be detrimental. We can get bogged down. The full committee is not the best place for that kind of detailed wordsmithing policy discussion. So I'm happy to work with anybody who has ideas for motions. Again, just send me through some bullet points. We can do a Zoom call and we can discuss through how best to put those into a format that's likely to be clear and accessible to the committee. Leah, you've unmuted. Do you want to add to that?
I don't want to add. I had a question about process, which
Sure.
is once this committee is over, can we talk to each other or not?
So it's a slightly complicated process. Basically, if you talk to each other, it needs to be less than 4 of you, which is the quorum. So any 3 of you can have conversations. But if it's more than 3, then that's larger than quorum, and that counts as a deliberation. Jeremy, if I get anything wrong, please step in, because this is much newer to me. Jeremy's an old hand at this. So yeah, that's the basic situation. In other subcommittees, small groups of 2, usually maybe sometimes 3, have had these discussions. It certainly helps to sometimes bounce your ideas around. But one of the reasons I offered myself in that case is because then we remove that issue where hopefully I would be able to, or Kevin, if he's available, would be able to give some of the direction or some of the ability to bounce things off people. But essentially, Jeremy, go ahead.
Generally, the concern is that if deliberations are occurring outside the meeting and then those deliberations then come to the meeting, then the concern is that it should have been a public meeting that people could follow. And one of the things that defines a public meeting is that you have to have at least a quorum in order to have that. So that's where Kaz was trying to be careful by specifying that it has to be less than a quorum to have those kinds of conversations. It's something that I think Kaz did a fine job of explaining. You just have to keep it. It's something that is kind of, you do have to be careful about the quantity of people. So it's best to have the discussions in the meeting if at all possible. So.
And I think in addition to that, speaking to each person individually, if it's more than the quorum, also counts as, am I correct in that, Jeremy?
Meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah, if it's more than a quorum, and these conversations take place, that's considered a public meeting. So and that cannot be without being able to publicly notice it, like has been done here, and people have the opportunity to come and watch and be a part of that. So.
Sergeant Maloney, you have your hand up. I don't know if that's from before or whether you've got something that you'd like to add.
No, that's an accident.
Okay. So yeah, essentially the next steps are, we will collate the actions, get the decision sheet out to you all as soon as possible. In the meanwhile, if there's any information that you would like us to get to you, please email us, just because that speeds up the process. There may be things that were missed, or we may have slightly misunderstood what it is that you were asking for. So that's one major bit. The other bit is start thinking about drafting some potential motions. As I said, we've generally found through the trial and error process that being very specific is not always the best way forward. I'm very happy to assist you if you have I want to do I have some ideas for motions around, I don't know, data collection, for example. Then we could have a short conversation, or we can email, because obviously emails are on public record as well. And then what we'd like to do is to receive those before the next subcommittee meeting. Hopefully you've all seen in your inboxes, I sent out the doodle poll today. So that's another item that needs taken care of. We'd like to get those scheduled as soon as possible. And the hope is to be able to bring the bulk of the work that comes out of this committee to the ad hoc committee on the 2nd of March, if at all possible, because of course the one that's taking place on the 17th of February is going to be primarily given over to community testimony. And I can see that Mr. Altucker has turned his camera on, so I'm assuming you also have a few bits and pieces to add, Kevin.
No, I actually don't, Kaz. I think you've covered it well. I just wanted to pop in and let everyone know I was still here. And I do have some closing words when we get to that point.
Okay. So if there are any final quick questions, just a couple of minutes, please ask them now. I think we've covered everything. I believe I need a motion to adjourn.
You can call for a motion, doesn't need a second, doesn't need a vote.
Okay. So
I motion to adjourn.
Okay, thank you very much. Kevin, if you'd like to make if you have any other announcements, and then we can adjourn this meeting.
Sure, I'll keep it very short, and it's just a thank you to everyone who's participating in this important process. First of all, thanks to our EPD personnel who dedicate an evening to come and answer questions and provide context. Thank you very much. Mayor Vinnis, thank you for joining us. And mostly thank you to the subcommittee members. And I want to give a shout out to our colleague Kaz, who where he is right now is very, very early in the morning, and he's probably running on fumes. So thank you, Kaz.
It's only 4 a.m.
It's only 4 a.m. All right. Well, thanks for putting your shoulder to the wheel, and thank you everybody for helping with this process. Have a good evening.
Thank you.